Somebody on Quora asked, why did Shoghi Effendi say that Baha'is should not be involved with politics, even though Abdu'l-Baha was very active in politics and was exiled on charges of political activities? Well, Abdu'l-Baha wasn't exiled. Rather, his father, Baha'u'llah, was exiled from Iran to Baghdad and later to Turkey. Baha'u'llah's family and many friends went with him. Abdu'l-Baha wasn't charged with anything until late in his life when his brother tried to stir up mischief by alleging that Abdu'l-Baha was building a fort and raising an army. The fort was the first 6 rooms of what we know as the Shrine of the Bab. Abdu'l-Baha had a lot to say about the world of politics, especially about the need for world peace. But he had a constitutional mindset. He had a definite vision of his role as a religious leader, governed by the principle of render unto Caesar, or the separation of church and state. And he was scrupulous about not crossing the line into what he would consider politics. For example, he wrote to an American Baha'i, "As to the election of women, this is a political question. I avoid all politics. But I say this much, that men and women are both parts of the human branch, and for mankind 2 wings are necessary. If either one is weak, the bird will not fly. But if both are strong, mankind will soar to the exalted summit." That letter was translated by Shoghi Effendi, who was working as Abdu'l-Baha's secretary at that time, in June 1919. The 19th Amendment to the American Constitution, that recognized women's right to vote, was passed by Congress on June 4, 1919, and ratified on August 18. So when Abdu'l-Baha wrote that letter around June 1919, it was a political issue in the narrowest sense of politics. Abdu'l-Baha carefully avoids getting involved in politics. So the premise of the question, that Abdu'l-Baha was exiled for something political, is wrong in both ways. But never mind that. The question is really about why Shoghi Effendi says that Baha'is should not be involved in politics. My answer is that it's a combination of principle and prudence. Baha'u'llah wrote, "He who is the Spirit, Jesus, was asked, 'O Spirit of God, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not?' And he made reply, 'Yea, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.'" And Baha'u'llah explains, "He, Jesus, forbade it not. These 2 sayings are, in the estimation of men of insight, one and the same. For if that which belonged to Caesar had not come from God, he would have forbidden it." Baha'u'llah endorsed the Christian principle of render unto Caesar the things that belong to Caesar. He says that the authority of Caesar is given by God, and that's why Jesus can say, "Render unto Caesar." And Baha'u'llah speaks in the same way about kings and rulers, and he favoured democratic government. So Caesar just means the government, whatever form it may have. This principle was not introduced by Shoghi Effendi. It is found in Abdu'l-Baha's lists of Baha'i principles, in the form of non-involvement in politics. Render unto Caesar means that the Baha'i community, as a religious community, does not have a political stance, and it cannot have a political arm. In the words of Shoghi Effendi, the Baha'i administrative order is entirely non-political and non-partisan. Non-involvement in politics does not mean that individual Baha'is cannot vote and participate in politics. Where the political system is democratic, political activism is a civic duty, for the stability of the country depends on broad participation. Abdu'l-Baha wrote to an early American Baha'i, that the Baha'is in America must vote. He said, "Thou hast asked regarding the political affairs. In the United States it is necessary that the citizens shall take part in elections. This is a necessary matter, and no excuse from it is possible. My object in telling the believers that they should not interfere in the affairs of government is this, that they should not make any trouble, and that they should not move against the opinion of the government. But obedience to the laws and the administration of the Commonwealth is necessary. Now, as the government of America is a republican form of government, it is necessary that all the citizens shall take part in the elections of officers and take part in the affairs of the republic." But he also wrote that the Baha'i communities must not be political in any sense. He refers to the report of the spiritual gathering in Chicago. The signature of that meeting should be the spiritual gathering, and the wisdom thereon is that hereafter the government should not infer from the term House of Justice that a court is signified, that it is connected with political affairs, or that at any time it will interfere with governmental affairs. Hereafter enemies will be many. They would use this subject as a cause for disturbing the mind of the government and confusing the thoughts of the public. The intention was to make known that by the term spiritual gathering, or house of spirituality, that gathering has not the least connection with material matters, and that its whole aim and consultation is confined to matters connected with spiritual affairs. This was also instructed in all Persia. That explains why Baha'i communities have spiritual assemblies, while the Baha'i writings talk about a house of justice in every town. Abdu'l-Baha realized that house of justice sounds like a courtroom or even a government, so he changed the name until, when the Baha'i teachings are better understood, the spiritual assemblies can resume the name that Baha'u'llah gave them. So that's the principle. The Baha'i administrative order is entirely non-political, but individual Baha'is as good citizens should be part of elections if they live in a democracy, and they should take part in the affairs of the Republic. Republic here is used in an old sense. Today we would say in the affairs of society. As I said, there is the principle, and then there is what is prudent at a particular time and place. What is new in Shoghi Effendi's time is that he called on the Baha'is as individuals, as citizens of their countries, not to be members of political parties or support one party against another, not to accept political offices, and so forth. This was primarily for prudential reasons. The legitimate activity of a Baha'i in one country could be spun to the detriment of the Baha'is in another country. Shoghi Effendi said that the Baha'is, also individually, have to demonstrate the non-political character of their faith. In the USA, that generally means not participating in primary elections, where party alignment is required. It would be awkward, wouldn't it, if it turned out that all the Baha'is in a town were seen heading to the voting booth when Party A's primary was happening? People might draw the wrong conclusions. It would be awkward in another way if the Baha'is on one side of the tracks primaried on one day and Baha'is in another part of town primaried on a different day. And so on. We don't want that, not now. Because people will look at individual Baha'is and suppose that that Baha'i represents the whole religion, each of us has to act as ambassadors for the whole. In most countries, there are no primary elections, so Baha'is vote just like any other citizen, choosing among those who have put their names forward as candidates. Baha'is generally understand that partisan politics are out. We don't do parties and factions. But it goes beyond the party aspect. Shoghi Effendi also wrote, "Let them refrain from associating themselves with the political pursuits of their respective nations, with the policies of their governments." Not associating with the political pursuits of the respective nations, with the policies of their governments, while participating in the affairs of the Republic and being positively obedient to their respective governments, is tricky. One person's good policy to be supported might be another person's political pursuit. I didn't say it was going to be easy. You can find yourself in the grey zone. If you do, ask your National Spiritual Assembly. That's their job. Shoghi Effendi also looked forward to a time when the Baha'i faith would not be a relatively unknown group that could easily be misrepresented, where the activities of a Baha'i in one country could become a stick to beat the Baha'is in another country. He foresaw that the Baha'i community could become so influential that politicians might seek to get Baha'i endorsement. And the Baha'is, wanting to provide education, healthcare, and other services, would need to work closely with government organs. In one of his World Order letters, Shoghi Effendi wrote, "As the number of the Baha'i communities in various parts of the world multiplies, they will no doubt find themselves increasingly subjected to the pressure which men of authority and influence in the political domain will exercise in the hope of obtaining the support they, the politicians, require for the advancement of their aims. These communities will, moreover, feel a growing need of the goodwill and the assistance of their respective governments. Let them beware lest they should be led unwittingly to bargain with their faith, to compromise with their essential principles." That's not our problem today. It's another level of complication, but we can leave that to the future. What I can say is that the major churches in many countries are deeply interwoven with public life and work with government agencies without being subordinated to politics. So the complication is manageable. In that letter, Shoghi Effendi goes on to say, "Let them proclaim that in whatever country they reside, and however advanced their institutions, or profound their desire to enforce the laws and apply the principles enunciated by Baha'u'llah, they will unhesitatingly subordinate the operation of such laws and the application of such principles to the requirements and legal enactments of their respective governments." So civil law takes priority over religious law and religious principle. Then he says, "Theirs is not the purpose to violate under any circumstances the provisions of their country's constitution, much less to allow the machinery of their administration to supersede the government of their respective countries." So that tells us how the principle, render unto Caesar, works out in the very long term. We can never let the Baha'i administration supersede the government. That would only be a question if everyone in a place was a Baha'i, but still we have the answer there. I think that separating the principle from what it means in practice in various situations clears up a lot of questions and misunderstandings. In fact, that last situation, if everyone were Baha'i, has actually come up at the village level. There's a 1983 letter that quotes an undated letter from the Universal House of Justice saying, "In another national community where the number of believers had increased to the point where the population of some villages had become 100%, or almost 100% Baha'i, the House of Justice upheld the above principle and stated that in each such village, while they should elect the local spiritual assembly, they should continue to elect the local council as required by the government, and the function of these two bodies should be kept distinct, even as their memberships were identical. Obviously, if everyone were a Baha'i, the question of identification with political parties has evaporated. So the answer that was right for the Baha'is around the world in 1930 would no longer be relevant. And if everyone is a Baha'i, no politician needs to get specifically Baha'i votes to win his or her campaign. So the second situation Shoghi Effendi speaks about is in the past. In the 100% Baha'i situation, the principle is that we still have two distinct bodies with two different functions. That's what render unto Caesar requires in that situation. It's one principle, three different pragmatic requirements. And that's all I have tonight. So good night. Remember to like it and subscribe, and thank you very much for listening.